H.R. 2838, the Chair appoints the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Womack, to preside over the Committee of the Whole.
The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the consideration of H.R. 2838, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to authorize appropriations for the Coast Guard for fiscal years 2012 through 2015 and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the bill is considered read the first time. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Mica, and the gentleman from West Virginia, Mr. Rahal, each will control 30 minutes.
A gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Lobiondo, is Mr. Mica's designee.
The Chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself such time as I may consume. H.R. 2838 will reauthorize the Coast Guard activities through fiscal year 2014 at levels which are consistent with the House-passed budget resolution. This bill includes critical provisions that will give the Coast Guard, its service members and dependents greater parity with their counterparts in the Department of Defense, something that is critical and important for these patriotic Americans. Ensuring parity among the armed services has been a top priority for the committee for some time, and I am proud to say this bill makes significant steps in progress towards aligning the Coast Guard authorities with those granted by DoD. In addition to parity issue, the bill contains a title intended to reform and improve Coast Guard administration. The Coast Guard does an outstanding job for our nation. However, the current budget environment, it is important for the Coast Guard to review the services authorities and to find ways to improve operations while reducing cost. I believe this bill will do just that. The bill also amends shipping laws to improve safety and foster job growth throughout the maritime sector and reauthorizes activities of the Federal Maritime Commission through 2015. Included in the bill is the text of H.R. 2840, the Commercial Vessel Discharge Reform Act, which will improve current regulation of ballast water and other discharges incidental to the normal operation of the vessel. Mr. Speaker, this provision is pretty simple. Currently, the Coast Guard and the EPA are making rules and have authority to enforce ballast water. There are currently 29 states and tribes that have their own rules. It is a regulatory nightmare to be able to do business in. We need one standard operation that reaches the highest level of technology that is available to us. This also allows for us to improve technology, if we're talking about jobs, and we certainly are hearing an awful lot about that these days, this is an opportunity for us to be able to ensure that maritime jobs will be able to continue to grow. The current system is simply impossible, and it threatens our international maritime trade. This legislation eliminates this ridiculous regulatory nightmare and establishes a single uniform national standard. The EPA, the Coast Guard, the National Academy of Sciences, the EPA Science Advisory Board, the U.S. flagged industry, every national maritime labor union, manufacturers, farmers, energy producers, and our largest and most strategic international trading partners all endorse our approach to this legislation. It's a common-sense way to be able to move forward, and it helps us accomplish our goals in the long run. So I would urge all of my colleagues to support the legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time is reserved. Gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield as much time as I may.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, the Coast Guard is a multi-mission agency responsible for a broad range of activities, including mariner licensing, emergency oil spill response, vessel inspections, and search and rescue operations. These and many other activities of the Coast Guard are indispensable and ensure that our coasts and ocean resources are protected, that our oceans, the Great Lakes, and inland waterways remain safe and efficient, and that our maritime industries continue to be vibrant sources of jobs and economic opportunity for the American people. I want to thank Chairman Lobiondo for his leadership in developing this legislation, H.R. 2838, the Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation Act of 2011, to reauthorize the activities of the Coast Guard for fiscal year 2012 through fiscal year 2014. Although I have reservations that the authorized funding levels in this bill are not sufficient to meet the many well-documented needs of the Coast Guard, at least this bill provides for roughly level funding for the next 3 years. We have had this discussion in committee for the last several months about the Coast Guard, Mr. Speaker, people wanting the Coast Guard to do more with less. The greatest concern that we have is that as we look at funding for the Coast Guard, we're beginning to ask them to do less with less. And that is going to cause future problems for our Coast Guard. In general, Mr. Speaker, the legislation includes several non-controversial provisions, especially Title II, which addresses issues of disparity in policy and authority between the Coast Guard and other armed services. I want to commend the Chairman for his commitment to address this issue. There are some provisions in this bill, however, which remain problematic, none more so than the provision that would sequentially decommission the Coast Guard's 2 heavy icebreakers. The administration has expressed its strong opposition to this provision in a statement of administration policy, and without objection, I'd like to enter that statement into the record.
Without objection.
At some point, we need to constructively engage the Coast Guard in developing a sound, balanced path forward that realigns our expectations with a level of performance that we can reasonably expect the Coast Guard to deliver, especially for its icebreakers and its polar operations. With that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time is reserved. Gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Speaker, I yield Mr. Gibbs such time as he may consume.
Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong support of H.R. 2838, the Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation Act of 2011, and in particular, Title VII of the bill, the Commercial Vessels Discharge Reform Act of 2011. Ballast water, while a necessity to maintain the stability of large vessels during waterborne navigation, has always been recognized as one of the ways invasive aquatic species, nuisance species, are transported globally and introduced into coastal waters while they do not live there before. Numerous invasive species have been introduced in U.S. waters through ballast water discharges. One of the most well-known is the zebra mussel in the Great Lakes, which has caused millions of dollars of damage in infrastructure. Current efforts to reduce the risk of invasive species being introduced through ballast water discharges are haphazard, contradictory, and ineffective. The management of ballast water currently is governed differently by the Coast Guard, the Environmental Protection Agency, as well as an assortment of international, state, and territorial regulations. As a result, vessels engaged in interstate and international commerce are required to meet several different standards for the management of ballast water, some of which are not technologically achievable or verifiable. Complying with this patchwork of regulations is burdensome and unacceptable. Commercial shippers are the heart of our nation's interstate and foreign commerce. As we all know, interstate and foreign commerce involving navigation is in the heart of the federal jurisdiction on the Commerce Clause of the Constitution. If we subject vessels visiting ports in more than one state to different permit requirements in each state that they visit, they will be forced to either violate state laws or cease making port calls in those states with requirements that are inconsistent with the technology that the vessel has installed in response to an earlier enacted regulation from another state. Vessels involved in interstate and foreign commerce are mobile and cannot be expected to comply with potentially scores of inconsistent state requirements as they navigate from one jurisdiction to the next. These inconsistent state requirements will impose serious economic burdens on interstate and foreign commerce. There simply is no reason to interfere with interstate and foreign commerce in such ways, particularly in a more sensible, uniform, and environmentally protective approach is available under this bill. Title VII of H.R. 2838 aims to address both the needs for standards to reduce the risk of introducing invasive species into our nation's waters through discharges of ballast water, and the need for vessels that navigate from one jurisdiction to another to have a uniform set of requirements to comply with. The bill establishes a common-sense approach for regulating ballast water, which will protect the environment, grow maritime jobs, and promote the flow of maritime commerce. I urge passage of H.R. 2838, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I yield as much time as he may consume to the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Ray Hall from West Virginia.
Gentleman is recognized.
I thank the subcommittee ranking member, Mr. Larson, for yielding me the time. In recognition of the tradition of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure to annually move bills to reauthorize the Coast Guard and the indispensable services it provides to this nation, I am inclined to support this effort if it will improve the condition and readiness of the Coast Guard. My home state of West Virginia may not be a coastal state, but our many stakeholders who use our inland waterways, such as shippers, tug and barge operators, and recreational boaters, appreciate the services provided by the Coast Guard, our guardians of the sea. For example, the Coast Guard's National Maritime Center in Martinsburg, West Virginia, handles the processing and approval of all mariner credentials for roughly 250,000 mariners. Additionally, the Coast Guard's Marine Safety Unit, Huntington, is located in Barboursville, West Virginia, which inspects vessels, conducts casualty investigations, and ensures port security along the Ohio River and other navigable waterways. These and other vital services provided by the Coast Guard directly support our maritime commerce, which is critical to the future economic health of our country. Yet, despite widespread acknowledgement of its importance, the Coast Guard has rarely received sufficient resources to accomplish its many complex missions. I am disappointed that the authorized funding levels in this legislation again fall short of the service's needs. Just this week, we learned during the Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation Subcommittee's hearing concerning the Deepwater Horizon disaster that the Coast Guard's marine environmental response capabilities have dwindled due to a lack of funding. We cannot expect the men and women of the Coast Guard to put their lives at risk to save the lives of others if they are forced to operate from inadequate facilities and to utilize equipment that has long since passed its expected lifetime. If we expect our ports and waterways to remain safe and secure, and if we want our maritime economy to be vibrant and growing, adequate investment in the Coast Guard is not an option, but a requirement. I also wish to express my concern about the ballast water provisions, a separate title, in fact a wholly separate bill, stitched into this legislation, but not seamlessly and not without consequence. Numerous state and local economies have had to deal with the immense costs associated with the invasion of plants and animals that hitch a ride into our country through dumped ballast water. Coastal states are spending millions each year to control invading species, and each year more and more invaders threaten to become established in our waters. For these reasons, I support the provisions that call for the adoption of a stringent national standards for ballast water treatment technologies. These advances would help to prevent the introduction and spread of these invaders and ensure the efficient flow of critical commodities through waterborne transportation. But, unfortunately, tucked within the appealing treatment technologies provisions of this added title lies a poison pill that this House would be foolish to swallow. All this year, this Congress has been advocating an enhanced role for the states in protecting their economies and environment. The mantra has been, back off the states, remove the heavy hand of the federal government, and allow the states a space to oversee their own programs. But now, tucked into the folds of this bill is a complete about-face. Rather than respecting state powers and allowing them freedom to, in limited circumstances, set higher standards to protect their own waters and their own residents, this bill imposes a down-from-on-high, a one-size-fits-all approach. I find it ironic that on an issue in which the states have taken a leading role in the absence of federal action, this legislation would prohibit states from having any role in protecting their local resources. And so I say to my colleagues, we have a choice to support the benefits provided by this bill without also swallowing the bitter anti-states' rights pill. An amendment offered by our colleague, Mr. Bishop, would protect the states. The Bishop Amendment represents a surgical fix that enables the states to nominate no-discharge zones to protect important state waters. Contrary to some claims, the amendment would not allow a state to shut down vital shipping zones or exempt all its waters from ballast discharges. The amendment specifically addresses these concerns preventing a state from taking such action. It provides for limited exemptions, just like those available to states in Section 312 of the Clean Water Act for sanitary discharges, an exemption, I would point out, that has been used only 26 times. The Bishop Amendment would restore the historic balance between the states and the federal government intended by the Clean Water Act. If the members of this body believe that states' rights must be protected from federal overreach, this bill begs the question, are you with states or against our states? I support the amendment offered by the gentleman from New York, Mr. Bishop, and I urge its adoption as a critical fix to an otherwise worthy bill. And I urge my colleagues to join me in voting to make that critical fix and pass this legislation. I yield the rest of my time to the ranking member.
Gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to take a moment and reiterate our thanks to the men and women of the Coast Guard, unsung heroes who are under-recognized and underappreciated, who put their lives on the line every day. They're a critical component of our armed services. They conduct critical missions to interdict illegal drugs, fishery law enforcement, as well as the Homeland Security component, and we want to make sure that we recognize and appreciate their efforts on an everyday basis. I'd also like to once again thank Mr. Larson for his cooperation overall on the committee, and especially with this legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time is reserved. Gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I'd yield as much time as is being consumed to Mr. Bishop of New York.
Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the ranking member for yielding, and I thank both the ranking member and the chairman for their work on this important bill. I have some concerns about the bill, but I'm going to focus my remarks on Title VII, which deals with commercial vessel discharge reform and deals more specifically with ballast water discharge and the concern about non-indigenous invasive species. These non-indigenous invasive species cost taxpayers and businesses hundreds of millions of dollars every year. In the Great Lakes alone, approximately $500 million is spent every year dealing with invasive species that clog municipal water systems and that damage infrastructure such as electric power plants, levees, and aqueducts. In California, over $7 million was spent to eradicate the Mediterranean green seaweed from 2 small embayments in Southern California, and $12 million had to be spent in San Francisco Bay to control the Atlantic cordgrass. Most of these invasive species arrive in our waters via the ballast water of commercial vehicles. Unfortunately, in my view, and I believe the view of a great many of my colleagues, the bill before us does not do enough to protect our communities and businesses from the avoidable costs of dealing with invasive species. This week, the state of California sent members of Congress a letter saying that Title VII of the underlying bill, and I'm quoting now, will set a federal ballast water discharge standard that does not provide a significant improvement over existing management strategies and would eliminate the ability of states to regulate vessel discharges in their own waters. Close quote. And, Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the letter from the California State Lands Commission to which I'm referring.
The gentleman's request will be covered by general leave.
Thank you. In my home state of New York, we've been working with Michigan and other states to develop standards that are achievable with the technology that is available today, but that would still protect sensitive state waters more than today's underlying bill would. Unfortunately, this bill does not incorporate these science-based suggestions nor the jurisdictional concerns of the states. And I also want to enter into the record, Mr. Speaker, a letter from the Environmental Council of states which urges that the states be able to maintain a role in making determinations with respect to their water quality.
Gentleman's request will be covered by general leave.
Thank you. Well, I think that most parties, and I'm one of them, agree that a uniform national standard is necessary to protect our water resources. One of my largest concerns is that this bill completely erases any role for states to protect waters within their jurisdiction. And so, as Mr. Rahal said, I will be offering an amendment later today that will allow states to petition the federal government under a set of criteria that protects international and domestic commerce to identify and protect highly sensitive water resources within a state's existing jurisdiction. My amendment does not add or change any technological requirements in the bill. This is an issue of extreme importance for the industry, understandably so, and for that reason my amendment simply does not affect in any way the technological requirements. It also does not give states carte blanche to prevent ships from releasing ballast water, another important issue for the industry. There's ample precedent for the amendment that I am offering and the policy that my amendment would embody. In 1996, the then Republican-controlled Congress amended the Clean Water Act, requiring the Department of Defense to work with the Environmental Protection Agency to regulate ballast water from military vessels through the Uniform National Discharge Standard Program. Through this program, the Republican Congress acknowledged a deep respect for the rights of states, including a residual authority for states to establish no discharge zones, similar to what my amendment would establish. Another precedent, Section 312 of the Clean Water Act, which is the closest analogy to ballast water discharges from commercial vessels, establishes uniform standards for discharges of marine sanitation devices. Section 312 specifically reserves a role for states to create no discharge zones for important state waters, provided that these zones will not adversely impact vessels from operating within the state. And in the past, ballast water legislation has included a role for the states, and industry was on board with those provisions. There's an irony to what we're doing here today, and that is during this Congress, much of the debate has centered on how states should be allowed to take the lead on managing different programs within their jurisdiction, be they educational programs or environmental protection programs or eliminating regulations and so on. And yet, in this instance, we are saying the exact opposite. We are saying that the federal government knows best how to protect local waters, and states are not given any say in protecting their waters. Just a few months ago, this Congress passed H.R. 2018, the Cooperative Federalism Act of 2011, which eliminates any federal role in setting baseline water quality standards, giving full discretion for the setting of those standards to the states. Title VII of today's bill says that states should have no say in what happens in their waters whatsoever, the exact opposite of what this Congress passed with pretty broad support several months ago. We also have heard a great deal from our friends in the Tea Party about the 10th Amendment and how rights need to be reserved to the states under that amendment. Well, I would contend that the ability to protect waters of the state and to set standards for waters of the state would fall within at least the spirit of the 10th Amendment, and I would hope that my colleagues would agree with that. So I just want to say that I believe my amendment, as Mr. Rahal referred to it, is a surgical attempt to fix what I believe is a significant problem for states. Mr. Lobiondo and I worked very hard at trying to come up with a sweet spot where we could agree. We were unable to get there. It was not for lack of trying, and I'm very grateful to Mr. Lobiondo for his willingness to work with me on this. But later we will be offering this amendment, and I hope my colleagues will support it. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank Mr. Bishop for dialoguing and for articulating his point. We have tried very hard to reach an accommodation. We're going to continue to reach an accommodation, and I guess this is what this process is all about. We have a difference of opinion about the impact of Mr. Bishop's amendment and a couple of these other amendments. We're looking at trying to find a way to make sure we have the uniform standards, and I pledge we'll continue to work to try to do that, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time is reserved. Gentleman from Washington.
Both sides have.
Gentleman from Washington has 14.5 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from California, Ms. Napolitano.
Gentlelady from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I too am very concerned about the serious threat that the invasive species pose to non-native waters. As the ranking member of the Natural Resources, Water and Power Subcommittee, we have held various hearings on the effects of the invasive quagga mussel, the zebra and the quagga mussel in western waterways. I've even traveled to Colorado's R&D to understand how they are looking at the R&D to be able to see how we can eradicate this invasive species. It was introduced into the West from the ballast water of vessels coming in from the Great Lakes. This mussel is a dime-sized mussel that clogs water infrastructure. The glue is so potent that nothing can take it off, including it's in the pumps, it's in the intake valves, and the pipelines, costing water agency hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to clean out, to allow for the water flow. The Metropolitan Water District of Southern California has spent $25 million on fighting quagga mussels since 2007. The Bureau of Reclamation has major problems causing funds to scrape off those major pipelines to be spent on this instead of projects needing those funds. I've seen firsthand the damage that quagga has done to the dams and the water supplies plants in Southern California. This invasive species will continue to have a devastating impact on the water supply of the West, and we must address this fact that discharges of ballast water carrying invasive species can and has caused irreversible harm to our nation's water, as is already the case in some areas. We must allow our state regulatory agencies the ability to protect against invasive species, and I will continue to oppose the bill if it includes provisions that hinder the states from protecting their water quality. I hope the chairman and a ranking member can come to some agreement that will help our states. I thank you and yield back. Balance of my time.
Gentleman from New Jersey, continue to reserve.
I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time is reserved. Gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Carnahan.
Gentleman from Missouri is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm honored to represent a district in the St. Louis, Missouri region near the confluence of the mighty Mississippi and the Missouri rivers, an area where inland waterways commerce is vital to our economic well-being, as well as to recreation, security, and safety. In a normal year on the inland waterway system, between 500 and 700 million tons of bulk commodities, with the current approximate value of nearly 125 billion, are moved an average of roughly 500 miles to produce in excess of 300 billion ton-miles of freight transportation. When given the choice, heavy bulk shippers often choose barge transportation on our waterways. It is estimated that barge shippers and their customers save more than $7 billion annually by utilizing inland waterways. As lawmakers, especially during these difficult economic times, we must do everything in our power to facilitate trade and economic activity. That's why this Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation Reauthorization Act is so critical to get it right. But we also see in this bill, as prior speakers have mentioned, a patchwork of ballast water regulations that has hampered our inland waterways trade and imposed unnecessary cost on business. I applaud the effort to create a national minimum standard to protect our environment while creating certainty and stability for the industry. But I do support Representative Bishop's amendment that strikes the right balance. It allows states' rights and unique interests to be protected within no discharge zones. I hope that eventually we can work out a compromise. I applaud the efforts of both sides in trying to reach that, and I hope that effort will continue. I hope this bill can find broad support that addresses the needs of the goods movement industry while still protecting our environment. I think we can and need to do both. I look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle on this important work, and again, urge my colleagues to hit the right balance to be sure we are taking care of the men and women that serve us in the Coast Guard, to be sure they can continue to serve us in the entire country. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from New Jersey.
I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time is reserved. Gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to now recognize for 3 minutes a gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. McIntyre.
Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of my amendment to the Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation Act of 2011, which we are working together to consider as part of the en bloc amendment. This important and timely amendment calls on the Committee on Transportation Systems to coordinate with local businesses to promote an efficient marine transportation system. As many of us know, the marine transportation system is essential to the American economy. It supports millions of American jobs, facilitates trade, moves people and goods, and provides a safe, secure, cost-effective, and energy-efficient transportation system. It's a win-win-win. Yet if there are not adequate maintenance resources in place, our MTS will continue to age, and the result will be a worn and decrepit waterfront, badly neglected locks and dams, and harbors with inadequate drafts to accept foreign deep draft tonnage. Our local businesses are on the front lines of commerce every day, and they know where the savings and efficiencies are that could be improved. We must work with our local businesses who know business best. If government's going to be involved in improving the business environment, it only makes sense that government talks to the businesses that we're trying to help. In my coastal district of North Carolina, marine transportation and commerce is the lifeblood of the Cape Fear region. In understanding the importance of marine transportation and waterway infrastructure, I sought the input of local business leaders to develop the 7th Congressional District Coastal Compact to outline key priorities for our area's coastal infrastructure, maritime commerce, and a way in which we can get the public and private sector and government agencies to work together. So this amendment that I've put forth builds on a proven model used to develop our coastal compact, and one that we believe that business leaders across this country would like to have a say and involvement in first-hand knowledge to be involved with our marine transportation system. This is an example for us in Congress, an example that we must follow to improve not only our marine transportation system, but also to create jobs and to sustain an environment in which American business can flourish. Therefore, I urge my colleagues to support this amendment so we can bridge a better partnership with our local businesses to improve the maritime transportation system and put our nation back on a path of economic vitality. With that, I yield the remainder of my time.
Gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentle lady from Florida that we affectionately refer to as Dr. Illy.
Gentlelady from Florida is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank my good friend from New Jersey for the time. And I rise in strong support of this Coast Guard reauthorization bill that is being considered on the floor today. I have the unique pleasure of representing over 265 miles of pristine coastline ranging from Miami Beach all the way down to Key West. In fact, 2 of the largest Coast Guard sectors in the United States, Sector Miami, commanded by Captain Christopher Scraba, and Sector Key West, commanded by Captain Pat DeQuatro, are located in my congressional district. And as such, ensuring that the brave men and women of the Coast Guard have the tools that they need to effectively patrol our coast is of utmost concern to me and to all of the residents in my congressional district. And this legislation before us is a fiscally responsible reauthorization of the U.S. Coast Guard, will include practical reforms which will ensure greater efficiency in the replacing of aging assets and improve utilization of all of its resources. This is particularly important in my district, as our 2 sectors have been working day and night to stop drugs from being smuggled into our country. These drug smugglers are becoming more sophisticated, more brazen in their efforts to bring illicit drugs to our shores. Just last month alone, Mr. Chairman, the U.S. Coast Guard seized and then unloaded over 2,300 pounds of marijuana and nearly 900 pounds of cocaine in Sector Key West. Without providing upgrades to our aging assets, it will become more and more difficult to keep pace with these drug smugglers as their technology attempts to surpass ours. And that is why I rise in strong support of this Coast Guard reauthorization bill, and I thank Dr. Frank for giving me the time. Thank you, sir.
Gentleman from Washington.
Good man.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could I inquire how much time we have left on our side?
Gentleman has 8 minutes remaining.
8 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This time, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Cummings.
Gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 2 minutes. 3 minutes.
3 minutes, Mr. Speaker.
My apologies.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the gentleman for yielding. I want to thank the chairman for his and our ranking member for the great work that you have done, not only this time but over the years. And I agree that as a member of the subcommittee, I've had an opportunity to, and earlier in previous sessions as chairman of the subcommittee, I've had an opportunity to visit many Coast Guard facilities, and I am never so much amazed at what I see when I see so many young people who give their lives, their blood, their sweat, and tears to save other people, and to make sure that our waterways are kept safe, and to make sure that our coasts are guarded. I call them the thin blue line at sea. I do support this legislation because I think it's very important. There are some concerns I have, but I do want to commend the chairman. I understand that we have a manager's amendment that adds a modified version of H.R. 2839, the Piracy Suppression Act, as a title to this bill, and I think that's very, very important. The privacy provisions include those that require the Department of Transportation to establish a training program for U.S. mariners on the use of force against pirates and require a report from DOD within 180 days on actions taken to protect foreign flag vessels from acts of piracy on the high seas. And I will definitely support that because I think it's very, very important. We've seen, and I know the chairman has spent a lot of time on this, what has happened with regard to these pirates. They feel like they can just board our ships and hold our folks hostage, and we cannot allow that to happen. And so I want to applaud the chairman and the ranking member for bringing that about. I'm going to have an amendment a little bit later on which addresses an issue which is important to me, and that is the ombudsman. I've said many times that we had put this in the last authorization because a lot of the folks at the ports and a lot of our mariners were complaining. They were saying that the Coast Guard would come and want to make changes and say their way or the highway. And one of the things we wanted to do is so that commerce could freely flow, we wanted to have somebody to come along and actually sit down and reason so that things could be worked out in a way that would be less onerous to the may I have one more minute?
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield 1 more minute to the gentleman from Maryland.
The gentleman is recognized for an additional
Thank you very much. Less onerous to the mariner community. And so I'm hoping that that amendment does pass because I think our Republican friends have constantly said that they want to do away with regulations that might impede the flow of commerce, and I think that my amendment is a step in that direction. I know the Coast Guard may not like it, but I think an ombudsman would bring about a fair balance so that we can achieve the things we need to achieve. And with that, again, I applaud the chairman and the ranking member for bringing this bill forward, and with that, I yield back.
Does the gentleman from New Jersey continue to reserve?
Continue to reserve.
Gentleman's time is reserved. Gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, we have no more speakers on the general debate, so I'll take a few minutes here to conclude on our side for general debate.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the opportunity to close on general debate, but the points that were made earlier, I do want to reemphasize a few points. One is the concerns that we have about the decommissioning process and the decommissioning of the 2 icebreakers that are in the U.S. Coast Guard fleet. The administration has a statement of administration policy, which you've allowed to be into the record. I think a follow-up to that point, Mr. Speaker, would be that we certainly would want to hear from the administration sooner rather than later about a plan for what some would call an organic capability of our icebreaker fleet. That is a U.S. Coast Guard owned and operated icebreaker fleet, rather than being left with potential and the real possibility of having to lease icebreakers from other countries to do the work that otherwise we would be doing. That continues to be a major concern. We've heard as well concerns about the ballast water title, and expecting amendments and further debate on that as the afternoon progresses. Certainly, we're going to have an en bloc amendment, and we'll have time to discuss those. I just want to underscore one of those from Mr. McIntyre and the role that the Marine Transportation System plays, or the MTS as we call it, as it consists of waterways and ports and intermodal landside connections that allow our various modes of transportation to move people and goods to and from and on the water. The MTS is vitally important to our economy. It's vitally important to waterborne cargo and the associated activities, which contribute more than $649 billion annually to U.S. gross domestic product, sustaining more than 13 million jobs. And Section 401 of this underlying bill would codify the Committee on the Marine Transportation System, a federal interdepartmental committee chaired by the Secretary of Transportation. And I think it's just important to underscore further about this MTS, or the Marine Transportation System, the role that the Coast Guard plays in maintaining that. It can be somewhat invisible to folks if they're not on the water a lot, but the role the U.S. Coast Guard plays in maintaining that marine transportation system that therefore underlies the economic growth potential that we have from a well-balanced and well-developed marine transportation system is important, and one of the underlying reasons why we even have a Coast Guard authorization bill each year to support the great work of the U.S. Coast Guard. So I'd encourage members to take a hard look at this bill. We've got some amendments coming up that members will bring up, and we'll have good debate on those. But certainly, as far as general debate goes, I'd like to take this time now to yield back the balance of my time and urge people to support the underlying bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Speaker, I would again like to thank Mr. Larson for his cooperation. Remind the members I think this is on balance an excellent bipartisan effort that moves the Coast Guard forwards, and I yield back the balance of my time.
All time for general debate has expired. Pursuant to the rule, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. In lieu of the amendment in the nature of a substitute printed in the bill, it shall be in order to consider as an original bill for the purpose of amendment under the 5-minute rule an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of the Rules Committee print dated October 28, 2011. That amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be considered read. No amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute made in order as original text shall be in order except those printed in House Report 112-267 and amendments in block described in Section 3 of House Resolution 455. Each amendment other than an amendment in block may be offered only in the order printed in the report by a member designated in the report, shall be considered read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. It shall be in order at any time for the Chair of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure or his designee to offer amendments in block consisting of amendments printed in House Report 112-267 not earlier disposed of. Amendments in block offered pursuant to Section 3 shall be considered read, shall be debatable for 10 minutes, equally divided and controlled by the Chair and Ranking Minority Member of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure or their designees, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The original proponent of an amendment included in such amendments in block may insert a statement in the congressional record immediately before the disposition of the amendments in block. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 1, printed in House Report 112-267. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an unblock amendment at the desk consisting of Lobiondo, number 31, Rule 1, Schuler, number 18, Rule 2, McIntyre, number 29, Rule 11, Cummings-Landry, number 6, Rule 12, McCall, number 28, Rule 14, Murphy of Connecticut, number 8, Rule 16, Brown of Florida, number 20, Rule 17, and Ribble, number 2, Rule 18. I support the amendment. Urge everyone to do so. I reserve the balance of my time.
She'll have to designate them and then yield you time. You need to know.
The clerk will designate the amendments in block.
Amendments en bloc consisting of amendments numbered 1, 2, 11, 12, 14, 16, 17, and 18, printed in House Report number 112-267, offered by Mr. Lobiondo of New Jersey.
Pursuant to House Resolution 455, the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Lobiondo, and the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Larson, will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Chairman, I urge all members to support the en bloc amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time is reserved. Gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of Mr. Lobiondo's manager's amendment and the request to consider en bloc with other amendments. In general, the amendment provides helpful technical and clarifying changes to the underlying committee print, which will improve the bill. In particular, the provision that grants the Coast Guard discretionary authority to extend the duration of medical certificates is important. This will help ensure that mariners are not left on the dock simply because of administrative backlogs within the Coast Guard, preventing the timely issuance of new certificates. Also, support the inclusion of the amended version of Chairman Lobiondo's piracy legislation, H.R. 2839, the Piracy Suppression Act of 2011, and expect that it will help to strengthen our efforts abroad to address the growing threat piracy poses to maritime commerce. In regards to additional amendments in the en bloc, Mr. Schuler's amendment number 2 is an important one and encourages all federal agencies certainly to enter into contracts and buy products produced in the U.S., creating jobs for Americans, and the Coast Guard should be no exception. With regards to Mr. Cummings' amendment, we're certainly supportive of that. It mirrors H.R. 3202, waivers granted by the Maritime Administration this past summer to allow foreign flag vessels to transport oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to other areas in U.S. territorial waters raised legitimate concerns that the administrative waiver process lacked transparency and accountability. This amendment would establish new notice and justification requirements for waivers of our coastwise laws and would help to ensure that our merchant fleet is not unnecessarily disadvantaged in the future. With regards to Mr. Murphy's amendment, the gentleman from Connecticut, I can think of no reason why it would not be appropriate for the Coast Guard, when it is soliciting for competitive proposals, to also seek optional job impact statements from these companies bidding on a contract. This will allow the contract officer to assess not only cost comparisons, but also job creation comparisons when making an award, and would serve the interests of both the federal government and the offerer. This would appear to me to be a good way, at little to no cost, to better leverage the job-creating potential of contracts awarded by the Coast Guard, and we certainly want to thank the Chairman for including Mr. Murphy's amendment into the en bloc amendment. Mr. Speaker, certainly there are a few other amendments that folks can speak to at the time that they wish, but we have no objection to the en bloc. We encourage its support and its passage. With that, reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time is reserved. Gentleman from New Jersey. Gentleman continues to reserve. Gentleman from
Mr.
Washington.
Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from New Jersey.
Yes, I urge support of the amendment and yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Question is on the amendments en bloc offered by the gentleman from New Jersey. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The en bloc amendments are agreed to. It is now in order to consider amendment number 3, printed in House Report 112-267. For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
Amendment address.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 3, printed in House Report number 112-267, offered by Mr. Cummings of Maryland.
Pursuant to House Resolution 455, the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Cummings, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the work of Chairman Lobiando and Chairman Mica, and of course our ranking member, Mr. Lawson, and the ranking member, Mr. Ray Hall. I appreciate the effort that they put into this Coast Guard reauthorization. I also appreciate the close working relationship I have with the Chairman, Mr. Lobiando. During my tenure as Chairman of the Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation Subcommittee, he served as my ranking member, and now that he is Chair, I appreciate the commitment to diligent oversight that characterizes his leadership of the subcommittee. I wish we had been able to reach an agreement on the issue at hand, but as that has not been possible, I'm offering this amendment to strike Section 301A of the bill. Section 301A would eliminate provisions included in the Coast Guard authorization of 2010 that I authored to establish an ombudsman in each Coast Guard district. The district ombudsmen are intended to serve as liaisons between the Coast Guard and ports, terminal operators, ship owners, and labor representatives. The ombudsman will enable these stakeholders to seek further review of disputes regarding the application of the Coast Guard regulations. Let me be clear that the provisions creating the ombudsman specifically provide that, and I quote, "The district ombudsman shall not provide assistance with respect to a dispute unless it involves the impact of Coast Guard requirements on port business and the flow of commerce." The provisions further clarify that in providing such assistance, the district ombudsman shall give priority to complaints brought by petitioners who believe they will suffer a significant hardship as a result of the implementing a Coast Guard requirement. I authored the provisions creating the ombudsman at the request of the port community, which approached me seeking another mechanism to engage with the Coast Guard to ensure that the application of regulations achieves critical safety and security objectives while having the least possible impact on commerce. Many members of Congress, and particularly those on the other side of the aisle, profess that limiting the power of government and ensuring that business are not burdened by inappropriate regulations are among their top priorities. Given these priorities and given the need to ensure that regulations do not threaten commerce or jobs, I'm frankly quite deeply surprised that the majority would seek to eliminate a provision that specifically provides businesses with an avenue through which they can seek changes in regulatory decisions in an effort to improve their businesses. Let me also be clear that I understand that the Coast Guard has not yet appointed any ombudsman, and I know that the service would probably prefer never to appoint an ombudsman because they would prefer that their regulatory decisions not be challenged. That said, rather than eliminating the requirement that the Coast Guard appoint an ombudsman, I believe that this authority should be implemented quickly to give businesses the opportunity to improve the application of the Coast Guard regulations. Finally, let me also explain that this provision does not, and I repeat, does not require any new personnel to be hired. The statutory language is clear, and staff have reconfirmed with the Coast Guard that the position of ombudsman could be a collateral duty that a qualified staff member performs in addition to their other duties. This is not my ideal arrangement, but I raise this point so that it is clear that the implementation of this provision does not require the Coast Guard to hire new staff members. I urge all members who are concerned about the impact and undue regulatory burdens may have on commerce to join me in supporting this amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time is reserved. Gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Speaker, I claim the time in opposition.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the gentleman from Maryland for his kind comments. And it is correct, we've had an outstanding working relationship. We've been able to come together on many issues and share a lot of information that has helped us both come to a better conclusion. Unfortunately, in even great relationships, sometimes there's some disagreement. It's an honest disagreement on how we should proceed. I understand the gentleman's argument, but I believe that the provision is duplicative and costly. The implementation of this language, I think, will worsen the challenges for the Coast Guard in a time when they're facing very difficult money constraints, and we've heard the talk about how they don't have the resources to do what they need to do, and we have to worry about their critical missions being able to be conducted. The Coast Guard does not support the adoption of this provision. They did not last year, and I once again want to thank Mr. Cummings for working so closely, but on this particular amendment, Mr. Cummings, unfortunately, I have to oppose, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time is reserved. Gentleman from Maryland.
Yield time remaining to the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Larson.
Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Speaker, I support Mr. Cummings' amendment striking the provision in the underlying bill that would eliminate the requirement for the Coast Guard to establish the Ombudsman in the Coast Guard districts around the country. Mr. Cummings offered and subsequently withdrew in committee his amendment in the hope that some compromise could be reached. Because the program is a little more than a year old, I suggest that it might be premature for Congress to repeal this new program, but certainly do want to recognize the work that Mr. Cummings and Mr. Lobiondo did to try to find some accommodation. But I do encourage people to support this amendment to allow the Ombudsman program to continue so that we might be better able to give a fair evaluation of the program in the future. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from New Jersey.
Continue to reserve.
Gentleman continues to reserve. Gentleman from Maryland.
I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from New Jersey.
I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Maryland. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the Chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Speaker, I ask for the yeas and nays.
The gentleman asked for a recorded vote.
Yes.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Maryland will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 4, printed in House Report 112-267. For what purpose does the gentleman from Mississippi seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 4, printed in House Report Number 112-267, offered by Mr. Thompson of Mississippi.
Pursuant to House Resolution 455, the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Thompson, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Mississippi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, my amendment would allow members of Congress to nominate qualified candidates for admission to the U.S. Coast Guard Academy. Located in New London, Connecticut, the Coast Guard Academy is one of the 5 prestigious U.S. service academies. The others are the Military Academy in West Point, New York, the Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and the Merchant Marine Academy in Kings Point, New York. These service academies provide 4-year graduate educations on a tuition-free basis to help mold talented young people into the nation's future leaders. Upon graduation, service academy cadets become commissioned officers and active and reserve components of the military, the Merchant Marines, and or the U.S. Coast Guard. Under current law, members of Congress are authorized to nominate candidates to all U.S. service academies except the U.S. Coast Guard Academy. The Coast Guard Academy uses an admission process similar to the processes used at traditional civilian colleges and universities. On an average, the Coast Guard accepts almost 400 applicants each academic year. Of those 400 applicants, a disproportionate number hail from states that border the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. The rest of the country is largely underrepresented. My amendment seeks to foster greater geographic diversity in the Coast Guard Academy's applicant pool by allowing each member of Congress to nominate up to 3 qualified candidates. Similar language that I authored with the gentleman from Maryland, Representative Cummings, was accepted by voice vote during consideration of the 2012 Coast Guard Authorization Bill. I want to recognize Representative Cummings as a co-sponsor of my amendment and a true partner in this effort. Under my amendment, for academic year 2013, the Coast Guard would be required to allocate a quarter of the slots in the incoming class to qualified candidates submitted through the congressional nomination process. In subsequent academic years, half of those slots would be filled through the congressional nomination process. My amendment does not require the Coast Guard to alter or lower its selection criteria. To the contrary, it anticipates that the Coast Guard will utilize its criteria to select the best candidates from the pool of member-nominated candidates to fill half of the slots in incoming class, just as it will do in filling remaining slots in the other half of the class. Additionally, my amendment does not require the Coast Guard to increase class sizes. That's a decision for the Coast Guard. At its essence, it seeks to ensure that the Coast Guard attract the best candidates from all over the country by increasing the applicant pool. Each of us has experienced the disappointment of having a talented young person that we nominated to one of the 4 other service academies be rejected. We all understand that it's a very competitive process and slots are scarce. I, for one, would welcome the opportunity to bring that person to the attention of the Coast Guard Academy and help put him or her on a path to accomplishing much for themselves, their family, and the nation. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.